This afternoon, as we mentioned earlier, is going to be a series of different breakouts. Really, the intent here is to get to specific case studies around what are all the amazing things that are actually happening today in the industry, to discuss how can we maybe expand on those the opportunities that are, I think, in front of us here in the near term, and obviously in the future long term as well. So we're kicking off this afternoon here today with on a topic of leveraging automation for design analysis and optimization. I'd like to introduce up here with Mike Lawless. He's the Director of Innovation from IMEG Corporation, and then John Berkoe from Associate Principal with Arup, Digital Delivery Lead as well. So, welcome.
Oh, thanks. I'll just say, if you guys have questions, just raise hands as we get through it. I think our plan is I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of some of the things we're working on and using at IMEG. John's going to share some of the things that he's using with his firm, and then we're going to try and have a discussion and answer questions. So we want it to be interactive. So if there are questions, like I said, fire away. Not a huge group here, so we should be able to handle any questions. So IMEG, just briefly, we're a multidisciplinary consulting engineering firm, and I always like to think about, we talked about building transformation, and the goal is to transform the building industry. And for me, it always goes back to why do I innovate? Why do we do this? And I tell people, we get to do pretty cool things, but that's not doing cool things isn't why we innovate. We innovate because, from my perspective, our perspective, we want to impact the outcomes for the people that use the buildings and the projects that we create. So we're here to talk about automation in the design process. And so I'm going to go through sort of 3 phases of it. Early in a project, we talk a lot about optimization and what are some of those tools that we use. And so this is just, this is a tool we use for site planning, where you can move the building around early in a project and really start to explore in real time with the client and the owner, what are the options, what's it look like if we add another building to that site. And I think the theme would be, with all the tools we have for automation, is it's just easier for us now early on in the project to provide feedback and information to folks so we can make better decisions. And then this is another one. I tell people this is a less exciting sort of automation tool, but this is when we look at energy sources for buildings or for a campus. This program just takes it and it puts a ton of different options together, thousands of different combinations, then it'll give you the 10 or 20 best. And sometimes it comes up with ones you might not have considered. And so, like I said, it's not as nice to look at as some of the generative AI things, but it gives you a really good result. And once again, it gives you that information early on to make good decisions. And then this, from the structural side of things, once again, as we get into projects, there's a lot of questions on how do we arrange things, what's going to be the best solution, what's going to be the most optimized solution. And I think as a theme, our industry, and I mean, I've been with IMEG for 25 years, and I think a lot of times we think about design, it's experience, the design that you provide is really based on your experience. And what I think as a group where we're headed is more of a data-driven design. You can't optimize your experiential design capabilities. But if we use data, then we can. And so this, the whole goal that tool I showed before is to move things around and allow you to see what that impact is. But then ultimately it's to look at, how much steel is in the building, how can we optimize that building and make good decisions. And some people are interested in cost, some people are more interested in carbon, but they go together. If you use less material, it usually costs less, and there's also less of a carbon footprint. And then once again, this is available on our website. We had a lot of people asking, I want my building to be net zero, and so we put a tool together. It's simple, but you can put in the size of your building. We give you some guidance on how much energy it might use. And one of the questions that always comes up is, what if I put solar on my roof? Can I be net zero? And this gives you that answer pretty quickly. And the other part of it is on the cost side of things. Usually we're working as part of a team, and so this allows us, sliders and input. You can adjust that price and see how it impacts the solution. And then, the Inflation Reduction Act is just another one of those tools where folks talk about it, but then when you get to their project, they want to know, what's this mean in dollars for us? And once again, it's just a tool that we can say, let's just put some basic information on some of the systems that you're considering, and then we can give some feedback on what money might be available, and maybe that changes the decision and the direction that they want to go. So virtual reality, and John and I had a little bit of a discussion on this. So I think virtual reality, we've all seen it used on large projects, and if you used it 5 or more years ago, you may have had not a great experience. So when we looked at virtual reality, we really look at it as, we want to use it on every project all the time, every day, sort of a scenario. Like, it's not something special, it's something that we can do easily and all the time. And that's where it's really developed, the software, the hardware is really developed. And so this is just an example of a project. It's a healthcare project. In this case, I think we had 65 clinicians that we put into the headsets so they could explore their patient room. Our goal for our team for 2024 was to have 1,000 virtual reality, augmented reality experiences. We ended up having 1,500 experiences for folks, and so you get better. But also, the reason we were able to do that was because there is just more automation. It's so much easier to take your model, put it into that environment, and then utilize it. I think when you think about all the data we have available to us, the 3D, what the 3D geometry of the building is the biggest data set for buildings that we do, and we don't always, I don't think, do a great job of visualizing that for people that aren't familiar, that aren't engineers. And so, this is just an example where it's the classic question if you've done patient rooms: do you want one big monitor or do you want 2 smaller monitors? So we got in a headset. Some people were on this virtually. Some people were in the headset, and they basically, you put yourself right where the patient is. You look at one screen, and then you're able to change it and put in 2 and see what that looks like. And I think that goes to the point of, when we think about virtual reality, the other thing that really drove it for us was being able to move things in that virtual environment. When it's just a static environment, it's hard to really get the kind of engagement that we've been able to get with with these tools. And I think people are skeptical, and even internal people are like, I've seen it, I've done it, I don't like it. But our clients really like it. I mean, this is just one example, but we talk about measuring, success, and how do you measure, was it effective or not? We do surveys on all the folks that we put in the headsets, and I mean, it's just overwhelmingly a positive response. And then, automation was in the title, so I do have one kind of simpler automation, just example of what we do. And I think a lot of people think, we're going to go to design and we're going to hit an easy button. And I tell them, I think for the near future, we're probably going to hit the easier button. It's going to be easier, but it's not like you're going to hit a button and it's going to do all the design for you. That's not where we are. We still, I think for the near future, we're going to need people to engage with AI and use it, and it's going to supplement them. Same with automation. But this is just one example. I know others have similar sort of tools, but it's really just leveraging, a lot of this is leveraging data, the data flow. The older style would have been everybody, mechanical does their thing, electrical does theirs. In this case, you've got 172 fan coil units that we need to circuit up. And, the electrical engineers thinking about how to do this well, and now we can hit a button, and it basically puts all the stuff on the drawings, and it's all using one source of truth of what that equipment is. And that's just an example of some of those kind of automation tools that we're using to improve quality, and it also improves the data that's provided in our documents as well. And then from a measurement standpoint, we talked about, I think some of these previous ones were, how do you measure success? How do you know if what you're doing is making a difference? And so this is, we're engineers, and I think people have been pretty interested in, like, hey, what is the impact? And I know on the panel was like hours. So we use dollars and hours both, but all the tools we have, we really look at, what's the adoption rate, who's using them, and then we use that information and then go help some of those teams that maybe aren't using them as much as they could to go help them. But really all all the things that I showed you, we want to track those and measure them. I mean, it's amazing how many, you get into discussions and people are, they have tools that are putting things together, and you say, well, how are you going to measure if this is successful or if you're making progress? And a lot of times that leads to a really good discussion on what is their success criteria, because in order to measure that, you need to really understand what does success look like. So with that, turn it over to John.
Okay. Hi everybody, I'm John Berkoe, and I'm with Arup. For those not familiar with Arup, this company's been around a long time. It's employee owned, and they basically they're a design engineering firm, and they pretty much only work on projects that have a social and environmental purpose to them. So they have a high emphasis on sustainability pretty much in all the major projects they're involved in, whether it be from a consulting standpoint or from an engineering standpoint. That's Arup. So now with me, so kind of in my career, the things that have kind of always given me the passion, what I'm passionate about, is kind of that confluence of people, process, and technology, and with the goal to create agility, which I feel is still undervalued and understated in the sense of the true value of VDC around how it creates agility. But I was just thinking about a question for the audience, so I might ask is, if we look at that confluence of people, process, and technology, I was going to ask, of those three, who thinks technology is the bottleneck versus more of a bottleneck in the ultimate success of VDC versus the people side or the process side? So we can start with technology. Do you think it's not technology? Okay, it's interesting. Got a half a hand out of total. Process. That's good. People? Yeah. That's what I spend most of my time dealing with, I think, is really the people side of it. And I think it's interesting to see that others kind of have a similar story. So from a global high-level strategic view with Arup, they have what's called this total design perspective on projects. So they look at it from a holistic perspective on pretty much every big job, looking at the all the aspects of, it's not just the expertise, but what are the intended outcomes and how we achieve them, and what's the mindset, not of just the people in the company, but of the client, and creating a collaborative environment. And so this is what has been called in the firm total design. And I like this paradigm because I think it's a good way to look at projects. And if you channel VDC, or in particular, and this topic of our presentation is around automation, automation feeds into that in a very strategic and important way, because it's an enabler for all those other things to work well. And so this text is literally from our website. It's not something I made up. So there's a real focus to the use of digital technologies on projects to enable the success with total design. That's really the goal. I don't expect you to kind of read all of this, but literally this is a map of tools, some of which are bespoke tools developed within Arup. There's a lot of that, and some of it's commercial software. And somebody's literally developed a map of this stuff and created like a landscape of tools and how it plays into the life cycle approach to a project and how it plays into different workflows. And it keeps growing. So the tool set just keeps growing. And I think there was a comment earlier today about the enabler of in-house developed software versus the use of commercial software. And I think that's an interesting area of tension. And even within a company like ours, there's a lot of value, it turns out, into creating your own software because you have the agility to customize it versus the maintenance level of effort that's involved in commercial software. So I wanted to focus on three key areas. I'm going to just present three quick examples of projects. One of them is kind of on this optimization side that Mike brought up as well. One of them is more on the delivery side, I think, and one is really about just focused on better collaboration. So the first project I'll talk about is one I've been personally involved in, which is in San Jose, California, or actually I should say under it, where we're designing the extension to the BART transportation system with a 5-mile-long tunnel under Silicon Valley. It's a massive project, and when it's done, it'll probably look something like this, but it's not. This is what the BIM model looks like now, at least in one of the stations. A lot of structure. So the point of this example is there's a lot of structure, and it's a 48-foot diameter tunnel, so the structure is actually converging on the principles of bridge design as well as basic platform structural design. And so what we looked at was using automation to enable fast prototyping from design to Revit production, because if we were able to do that, then there would be a lot more flexibility and opportunity for design optioneering and less time spent on reproducing or updating the Revit model for updating the drawings. And so without getting into the number of tools, they're using Grasshopper, they're using Python, they're using a lot of Dynamo. There's a lot of this kind of stuff going on. And then Arup has this tool called Digital Design Brief, which is basically an intelligent housing of input data that manages the quality and integrity of the data coming in a good way, so that you know that you're not going to have the garbage in, garbage out problem. So this is ongoing. This has been tremendously successful. I think it's reduced the amount of hours for BIM production in the hundreds and hundreds of hours reduced, which doesn't mean there's not a lot of hours spent on BIM production, because there is, but it's reduced a lot, and especially on the structural side. This project here is one I wasn't involved in, but I know the people that were, and this is related to the Allegiant Stadium project in Las Vegas. And this one was a real collaborative effort, I think, with Trimble, and all the main tools here are Tekla and Revit, but the innovation here is all around the combined use of Tekla and Revit and having an in-house, they call it the repo, but it's like, I don't know if you've seen Speckle, but I think this is kind of like a sort of hybrid of a bunch of things, but it's basically a data repository that enables basically real-time transformation from Tekla to Revit, so that Tekla can be used for the steel fabrication and Revit can be used for the drawings produced for the contractors. And this was very successful. They actually, I think, saved 3 months on the project, at least on the structural design deliverable there. So that's really around the deliverable. So good use of automation. The last one is really a little bit different, but this one is an example. The example I'll show is in Toronto. It's a huge rail expansion project called the Eglinton Expansion Project, but it's basically a lot of the route expanding around Toronto, including tunnels and including light rail and including subway stations. It's a long-term deal. And one of the valuable tools that's come out of this is, so Arup has this in-house software called Fuse, and it's basically an integrator. It just uses FME as a sort of under-the-hood integrator to all these databases and brings all this information into a single website, and it can be basically, and it layers onto Esri for the mapping, geospatial data. So you have your geospatial data, you have all kinds of data that can be layered onto that, including design data. It links to Autodesk Construction Cloud, and then it links to Power BI, so all kinds of dashboards are produced that monitor the progress of the job, both in design and construction. And it's very easy and instantly accessible, and it's been a huge value on this project. The clients are really keen on this because it's kind of that single source of truth thing that we all think about, and enables everybody to kind of have access to the authentic, updated information in the same place, same time. So that's the end of my presentation. I would say the journey is, kind of on its way, but I'm still amazed at how difficult it is to do all this stuff. Automation and scripting and BIM it's just like, you would think it'd be less complex, but it's not. So we were going to open it up to some questions, and maybe Mike and I's presentation has prompted some ideas and thoughts.
Did you want to use this, or are you good?
I'm good. I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, let's open it up for any questions. We've got Zinga over there with the microphone.
Hey guys, so I'm curious, and maybe this isn't maybe an IMEG question, but I imagine Arup probably has perspective on this as well. When you look at sort of that streamlining, the automation of design iterations and so forth, and you're looking at how to evaluate the right system for a project. And I'm gonna leave it at the clean example of a ground up building. Obviously it gets nasty when it's not that, but to what extent, when you do that, are you able to factor in all the sort of regional quirks, preferences, trade availability, trade skill sets into that decision-making process? Or are you really looking at it as an early stage tool, and then you've got somebody who's very familiar with the local capabilities, local preferences, who's gonna filter that optimization through kind of that lens? Because, you know, when you operate nationally, as you guys do, I imagine you see all that variability just as, you know, as we see it.
Yeah, so a couple of things there. So one, we do have local. So what we talk about is we do have local offices. So we're a large local firm with national expertise. So we rely on those local offices to provide some of that local information and input to our group. But the other part of it is, I mean, I think if we were to pick an ideal way that we would work, is we would have, you know, partners, and you have a team together, and then you're able to get input from the contractors and others as you're going through that process. But, you know, all the processes are a little different. So part of it is really in that optimization phase, looking at, you know, if we can use less material, I mean, the concrete building, you know, those sorts of things, it's typically going to be the more efficient design. If you're comparing systems to each other, that's a little bit different discussion as well. I don't know, John, what you've seen.
Yeah, I think from a design engineer's perspective, I think the gap to close is all around constructability. So I think the tendency with tools like this is to iterate on a design and get like the ideal design, but it has features that are not constructible. So I think the gap is really in terms of working better with, from I guess our perspective, be working better with contractors to make sure that they're tied into that process, so that constructability is also embedded into the process more.
Getting my steps.
It is a pretty big room.
Yeah.
Sorry to
Get your
make you
steps in
run.
today.
Actually, I want to add on to that, because that was the question that was in my mind when you were showing your model and this concoction of inputs coming together. Do you have a sense of that constructability from the contractor, what it is from the contractor specifically you need to see? Or are you at a stage now of really looking at this as a collaboration, maybe less structured, where you're looking to import some of their constructability data? So is it a conversation or is it data? And do you know what data you need?
Yeah, go ahead.
That's a very interesting question, and I think a lot of it depends on the contract model on the project. So when we work on a progressive design build project, there's a lot of input from the contractor. There's a very good collaboration and teamwork that comes into play before these kind of tools are even put into play, right? But if it's a different contract model, then I would say no. I think that gap I was just mentioning still exists, and I think it takes effort for people on the design engineering side to bring that forward, and some do and some don't, right? But I think it's, yeah, again, software that can enable that to happen easier, because I know that you're a software person, again, would make it so you don't have to develop a bunch of scripts from some people that do that, but just have that more embedded in the process would really help.
Yeah, I mean, I think ideally you collaborate with contractors. I guess the thing I would add is, I think in today, like there's a lot of like steel, like pretty basic steel buildings that are done, and the way it's optimized is based on the experience of the team that's working on that project. And there's no iteration, or it's a lot harder to iterate with some of the standard software packages for structural engineers. So really what we're trying to do is say, let's, like at the beginning of a project, let's just take some basic ideas on, you know, where's our lateral framing, you know, those sorts of things, what's our column spacing, all those sorts of things. Let's work with those and see what is a more optimal solution that's not solely, you know, the experience of the team. So I think the next, you know, to some degree, the next level is, ideally you'd have a contractor as you did that, but if not, at least you can get started from a spot that's hopefully a little bit more efficient than when you would have started from without it. She's gonna get her
Yeah.
steps.
She's getting her steps in.
So we often hear about solutions, and one of the aspects of it is scalability. And obviously, you've talked about some impressive projects and very complex needs. And when people talk about scalability, they're often talking about scaling it up. And I guess my question for you, or ask you to comment on, how this is scaled down, because most of the projects are not mega projects or even big projects. There's a lot of medium-sized projects, and many contractors, need similar solutions on a smaller scale. Can you talk about that?
I could, so.
Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, so for our, Arup does probably bigger projects than we do. So we spend a lot of time talking about this, because if you look at the projects that we do a lot of smaller projects. So as we build tools, the question is, well, how does this apply, if I'm remodeling, I'm doing a tenant infill, or I'm remodeling an academic building, or those sorts of things. So that is something we take into account when we put these tools together, because we do want them to apply to as many projects as we can. Now, there's not all of a lot of things. I think somebody asked the question and said, hey, this is for ground up buildings, yes, it's easier, and there's probably are more tools. But a lot of the processes that you use on a new building, there's parts of it you can use on any project. So that's really our goal is, when I talked about virtual reality, it's like, we don't want that to just be used on some really large healthcare project. We want to be able to bring that in, and somebody can look at their event space and see where they want, how they want to arrange that space, and where they want their, projection screens to be. Because it's that easy to use and that easy to do. So that's the goal. I don't know.
Yeah, I think, Johnny, that's a good question. And it's a bit of a frustration for me, because there is, maybe the industry needs to do a better job of overcoming the perception that technology is more valuable for larger projects, because a lot of it is just very easy to implement and work. It's like if you're using Google Maps, you use it if you got to drive across the country, or use it whether you drive across town. What's it matter? So yeah, there are some tools that require bespoke development. That is a cost. But if the tool is complete and it works, and it requires a minor number of hours to basically get it set up on a project, and we do have small projects too that project managers say exactly that. They go, I don't need to do this because my project's not big enough. And it's like, based on what is my question? So I think it's more perception than reality, but I would say that if it's bespoke software, then that's an investment. But even then, what else are you paying for? Because you're going to reduce this. I think one of the issues is, at least what I see in our firm and other firms I've worked with, is they don't compensate the cost of the technology with a reduction in the cost of the other disciplines. So if I'm saving 10% of my engineering man hours, let's just say, through the use of automation and design optimization, am I reducing the budget for my engineering team by 10%? No, but they should, because you'd be more cost competitive and you're performing to that level. Same thing with 4D. If it improves your scheduling by 10%, are you reducing your scheduler's hours? Maybe, maybe not. But I think that's where technology has great value, is really in reducing the cost of these other departments, but a lot of times it's just not done.
And I think so, when we met the first time, we both went through some of the things we were,
Yeah.
and then we asked, and the question we both had for each other was, well, how do you get people to use it?
Yeah.
And I think that is the one thing that is a little bit easier about larger projects, is they do get a lot of attention. And so typically you might have more people driving the innovation and the things that are a little bit different for folks to do day to day on those larger projects. I think that's one of the things about larger, when I look at our larger projects, it's easier to drive those solutions there.
You only got 5 steps in there.
Sorry, I made an easy one. So when you talk about this discrepancy between a larger and smaller project, how much does it come back to when you ask the person, be like, would you enjoy doing it 2 different ways? And being inefficient in both of them? I mean, does that become part of it? You're talking about where you're realizing these opportunities and you're seeing an ROI. Why go back and do it the old way?
I know.
I think, so we're employee owned as well. And I think Alex had a great description for McCarthy. It applies for us too. We're not that we're not like that iron fist, you have to do it this way. And I think part of that is, I mean, so in engineering, people go back to their desk and they design, and it's really hard to have control over how they're going to do that design. So it's really about influencing them, and so I think that's the challenge. Is
Yeah, I
how,
think-
it is easier and it is more efficient, but you need to convince them, and you need to convince them to do something different. So change management, I think, is just a huge part of it.
I think part of it is culture. I come back to tools number 10, having VDC or the like professional leaders in the C-suite. When you start seeing that, then I think then there's clearly a culture, corporate-wide recognition of overcoming what you're talking about, Brian.
I think the other thing that's interesting, or I was thinking about as I was getting ready for this, is like you think about ChatGPT, and that is in the news like everywhere. And so I've given some presentations, and we've polled a group of, it's been a kind of a bigger group, engineers, architects, op owners, and like 25% of people had never used ChatGPT or anything similar, and then 25% used it hardly at all. And that's something where if you think about like change management and communication, I mean, I think we're all getting pretty inundated with that information every day, and there's still a pretty big, group of people that aren't taking advantage of that. So I think back to this thing, I don't think it's engineers, I don't think it's our industry, I think it's just people.
Yeah, I think that GPT thing is because we have an internal tool called Fuse GPT. It's part of that Fuse platform we brought in, and it's so common sense and so usable. They bring in all the contract documents in their own library, and then the system operates like ChatGPT, but you're only querying on contractual documents, so you're not pulling in information from all over the World Wide Web. So if anybody needs to know anything about a project, they just query it and they can learn, and it has the reference and everything. And it's so useful. So we put it on this project, and a lot of the people using it range from the project director to a few others, and then there's this wide number of people that don't use it and still send emails to each other asking for a reference or asking for information. And it's like you literally have this tool that takes 2 seconds to get that answer, and they still don't do it. And it has nothing to do with age and anything. It's just, I can't figure it out, to be honest.
I think it's an opportunity.
There is.
And I think if you're in innovation, I don't know, I think about this a lot. I don't think we're in these roles unless you're pretty persistent and pretty optimistic. And so I think, I tell my team every time somebody says, I've never heard of that tool or that thing, and you're like, I've communicated this I said, none of that matters. I said, that's your opportunity to educate that person on it. Because if they're asking you and you educate on them, they're probably gonna do it, and then they're gonna spread it. So instead of looking at it as like a failure of your communication, look at it as an opportunity, because you're never going to be 100% with communication. So if you look at it as a failure every time, that's a super depressing way to go through life and to go through work.
Life, yeah.
So that's how we think about it.
I got one more question for you guys. How do you guys view this as a competitive advantage in this sort of industry? I know that there's been sort of this, feels like a drive to like the lowest, there isn't a can you create a value proposition on this automation that owners are willing to acknowledge and pay for, and they understand that they're actually getting a better service from you guys? And have you found that to be more as a competitive edge for you, or is it still kind of competing on the basic services? And this is more of a cost savings and automation, maybe efficiency gain for your team to be able to work less hours, the subtraction for your own team.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Hanu. I think it is a competitive advantage, but it isn't always marketed that way. It's the business leaders that are bidding on projects aren't necessarily incorporating, like I pointed out a little while ago, we could literally lower the cost of our bids and win more jobs. I mean, there's a competitive advantage right there, but it isn't always taken advantage of. Whereas some of the smaller projects that are for more sort of technology-oriented clients really see the value of some of these tools, and they come to the firm because they know that the tools will be put into place. So I would say it's there, but there's an opportunity, as Mike would say, to increase that in many, many ways. I think it's still understated. I think a lot of it's because the software vendors don't have it already built into their software, and it does take effort. I mean, why do these other codes even exist, right? It's like I always wonder, why does Grasshopper even exist? Why does Autodesk just do this already? But anyway, another story.
I think the other thing that I would say in response to that is, like, you know, Arup, IMEG, you know, other larger, you know, more sophisticated groups. I mean, we all probably have similar-ish things too. So, you know, if that group is competing with each other, it's probably pretty similar. I think to me, the competitive advantage can sometimes come into some of those projects that are the more mid-size or smaller projects on, are you really as a group, as a firm, able to apply that same level of or those same tools that you might apply to a bigger project to some of those small to mid-size projects. I think that's potentially where there's a little bit more competitive advantage available.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, I think we can wrap it there. Thank you, John and Mike. Appreciate that.